Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Today we are going to do a knife blade regrinding video. I had somebody ask me for this video in one of the last ones. I think I've already done this before, but you know, we got the new camera, so let's just go ahead and play around and make another one. So I believe the guy was asking about how to regrind like pocket knives, you know, like the Benchmade 940. You know, these are pretty thick from the factory with the factory blades, and I think he's fighting some of that, and so I think he was, you know, wanting to know expressly on how to regrind the 940. I have no idea if the guy's a knife maker or if he's just a regular, you know, regular average guy. So what we're going to do, this one right here has got one of my 1095 blades in it, and so when I grind these, I grind them. They're pretty much a full flat grind, a full zero flat grind, I guess you could call it. So pretty much, you know, you got 1/8 inch stock, and you grind that with a full flat grind on either side down to pretty much as thin as you can get it. Typically, I'll raise a burr on the belt grinder on like a 220 or a 320 grit finish, which is all I do on the belt grinder. And then when I come over and I bring it to my my sanding station and I hand sand the blade out, pretty much I'm getting a burr from both sides on, you know, just sanding the flats. So once you end up sharpening it and knocking off that burr, you end up with like 5 to 7 thousandths or so at the shoulder of the edge. So this one right here, I mean, I can't really regrind it anymore. I mean, it just, it won't get much thinner. Not without thinning down the whole blade stock. And that'll make a little bit more sense when we get to this. Now the only, I've just got a, this says Echo Forge in Taiwan. It's just some paring knife that I picked up from somewhere or other, and it sits here on the bench with a whole bunch of other knives that I'm not really too sure what I'm doing with. But this is going to be what we're going to regrind. It's going to be the same thing if you go to regrind a 940. The only difference is that you might want to go ahead and remove your thumb stud before you start regrinding, because it may end up getting in the way. The way these things are made, the thumb stud has to go on the flats, you know, from the blade stock, but still that you might be hitting the shoulder of that thumb stud and it might just get in the way anyway. So pull your thumb stud out and then regrind it. Okay, so this knife right here, it has got what they call a saber grind. So you've got the flat, okay, so so if you look at it this way, you know, this doesn't have any tapering in it, you know, no distal taper, you know, from the ricasso to the point, and none from the ricasso to the butt. It's just one flat piece of steel, which is the way most knives are built. All right, so if you look at it here, this part from the spine to about right there is the flat blade stock, right? Okay, now from here, this grind line from here to about the shoulder of the edge, that looks to me to be a pretty light hollow grind. So, you know, it's more efficient to grind steel on a wheel than it is on a platen. So a lot of times factory knives are going to have some sort of a hollow grind just because it's more efficient. And then from right about there to the tippy edge, that would be your edge bevels. Okay, so when somebody puts this on a stone, if you lay it flat, that's going to be your blade, or your blade stock. Okay, if you tilt it like that, that is going to be your blade bevels. All right, and if you tilt it a little bit higher, that's going to be your edge bevels. All right, so after a while of sharpening, you know, since even though this is a hollow ground, it's still a wedge, right? So as you sharpen the very edge back, what happens is that wedge gets steeper and steeper and steeper. And we all know the thinner, the better it cuts, right? So as that blade gets steeper, you know, just because the blade gets worn down, what you do is you just take metal off the sides, and then, you know, you thin it back out, and then your cutting performance comes back. So we're going to go ahead and do that with this one. It might show up a little bit cool because hollow grinds, we're going to be doing this on a regular old sharpening stone. And so as we sharpen, you know, on a flat stone, that hollow grind is probably going to become less and less and less. So a word on stones before we get to the actual sharpening here. And I forgot to get a paper towel. This is not a job for ceramic stones. It's not a job for diamond stones. It's not a job for Arkansas stones. And it's not a job for fine grits, okay? This job right here, we are going to be hogging metal off of the side of that blade. And for that, there is nothing like coarse grit. Honestly, my favorite is coarse grit crystalline stones, okay? You could also use India stones, like the Norton coarse India. You don't really see those very often. You can also use water stones, but use the coarser grits, okay? You guys know how much I like that KW65, I think it is, the King 1000, 6000 grit stone. That stone right there is not near coarse enough for this job. But King also makes a 1000 220 grit stone. You pick these up for like 20, 25 bucks delivered off Amazon. If you're into water stones, this is an awesome repairing slash, you know, regrinding, you know, any kind of rough work. That 220 grit is really good. You could do the same thing with these Nortons, the Norton water stones. This one is a 1000 and a 220. They also make a 4000 and the 8000. These are really good stones also, but these are, you know, 2 to 3 times the cost of these Kings. They are a little bit wider and everything, but especially these 220 grits, the 220 grit water stones, they're soft, and when you're doing a job like this, you're typically putting an awful lot of pressure on there just to get everything to cut faster. And so these will dish out pretty bad with this type of use. So they do work good for that, but I would use the less expensive King, and then just, you know, just plan on flattening it and, you know, wearing that stone out faster. This stone right here would be probably a pretty good choice. This is, I had this out, I was talking with a buddy of mine, Jason from Oregon, I think. And this is one of his favorites. This is a fine India and a medium crystalline. This is what he calls the Goddard stone. Wayne Goddard, he was a really good knife maker. I guess this was, he actually talked Norton into making this stone. And you don't see these very often either, but you know, they're a pretty good stone. That medium crystalline, it's abrasive. I mean, it's a coarse enough stone that you can do a lot of work with, but it's not near as coarse as the coarse crystalline stones. And that drops us down to these two right here. This stone right here is probably my favorite. I have used this stone on pretty much every single knife that I've made for the last decade, all right? It's a Norton coarse fine, Jum 3. So it's a pretty big stone. It's like 2.5 inches wide. Almost 2.5 inches wide, 2 3/8 by like 11 or 12 inches, about 11.5 or so. So it's a really big stone. I got this from a guy at a yard sale long time ago, and it was dished really bad, but it cut really good, and I kept using it. And then when I learned how to repair stones, flatten them, dress them up, and you know, bring them back to life, I flattened this one out. And this one, I mean, it's probably a third thinner than what it was brand new. But this stone right here, if I sharpen every single knife I make from now until the end of my career, I might wear this out. I'm not too sure. And that leads us to the stone that we're going to use today. This one is only a couple of years old, production version of that same stone. But this is a newer one. That one right there, I want to say was like from the 40s or the 50s, just judging with the box that it came with. This one right here is like within the last 5 years old, and I really have never used it all that much. So that's what we're going to use today. We're going to use the coarse and the fine side. Now, the way that I like to sharpen, I mean, I've got one of those sink boards that honestly I made out of a chunk of 2x4 that I keep There's one for the shop sink in here, and there's one in the kitchen sink. You know, and they work really good, but typically I do most of my sharpening here on the bench. So I take an old chunk of 2x4, and I take a paper towel. I put the paper towel down first, put the chunk of 2x4, roll the paper towel down on top, then set my stone on. Now this makes it a really nice steady platform for my stone. It raises the stone up off the bench so that I can, you know, I have plenty of clearance for my hands. And it's nice and steady. My bench is made out of 2x4s that have been glued and screwed together edgeways, and then I tried to plane off the top. You know, it's a really steady bench, but it's not really all that flat. But this kind of you know, gets around that. For oil, we are going to be using bamboo oil. This is just the bottle that it came in. Honestly, this is mineral oil that I get at the local farm and ranch supply house. Buy it by the gallon instead of by the little bitty bottle, and it's way cheaper per ounce that way. So we are going to oil up our stone here. Like I said, I haven't used this stone a whole lot. I don't know if it's going to be thirsty or not. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay the stone down flat, like I showed you on the stone before. So this right here is our you know, there is no bevel here, it's just the flats, right? Now we are going to lift it up just a little bit until I feel the blade bevels, okay? Now here, all I'm going to do is try to keep that blade bevel flat against the stone. And this has got some pretty narrow blade bevels, so, but you'll feel the flat. And here, honestly, it does not matter what motion you use. If you want to go back and forth like this, now I'm not going straight back and forth because the blade is longer than the stone is wide, okay? So I am going kind of diagonally here. But you can do that, you can do circles, you could do forward and back here, and then come here and do forward and back. You can do whatever motion it is that you feel like you can hold the steadiest angle, all right? So we're gonna go back to the what I was doing before, just so we get a nice clean scratch pattern. And this stone is cutting really, really nice. Okay, so now, let's get this cleaned off a little bit better. Okay, so this here is what we started off with. All right, you can kind of see the scratches that are going this way. That was the factory grind lines. Let's go this way. Okay, I'm still getting used to this camera. You know, the GoPro, the screen's on the back that I can see, so I have a mirror behind it. This one right here, the screen's here, but the center of the lens is over here. So anyway, so that's what it looks like on the factory. Now, if you see what I've been grinding here, you can see that that edge bevel is a little bit less, okay? You can see inside, I need a pointer. You can see inside the hollow grind here, there's, you know, it's shiny here and it's shiny here, but there's still some corrosion here, okay? So that's showing you that it's hollow ground, because the stone is grinding where it's shiny and it's not able to reach that center, you know, the deep part of the valley there yet. And you can see that this blade bevel is wider now than what the other side is, okay? So, and this is one of those that, I mean, since this is a hollow grind, we could probably go until either we feel a burr on this side. If we're grinding on this side, we'll feel a burr on this side. Or until those edge bevels almost disappear, or until we see that the center, you know, that corrosion in the middle of the hollow grind, until it goes away. And you know what? We've already done quite a bit of work. This is some pretty soft high carbon steel, I would guess, seeing as how it's got corrosion on it. So let's just grind this a little bit more. Okay, so now this is what you have to love about these crystalline stones, is because we are done on this side. I hope you'll be able to see it here. But, okay, so on this side that we haven't ground, you have your flat, you have your blade bevels, and then that little ribbon of light right along the edge. You can really see it up here at the point. That is going to be your edge bevels, right? We go on the side that we've been grinding, there are no edge bevels anymore. So, and our blade bevels are quite a bit wider. All right, so we've pretty much done everything that we set out to do on this side already. This is why you gotta love these Norton crystallines, because they just, for what they are, they hog material off. And that's one of the big problems that people have when they're sharpening knives, especially knives that aren't fairly sharp already, is if you take a knife that's in really rough shape and you really need to remove a lot of material just to get a new edge bevel going, and you try to do that on something like a black Arkansas stone or a fine diamond stone or, you know, a ceramic stone or anything like that, you'll be there for days. Because that stone just doesn't take off enough material fast enough that you can do it without, especially newbies, getting tired out. I mean, not that you're physically exhausted or anything, but that, you know, your hands, if you're not used to that particular kind of work, at first, you know, you can hold a pretty good angle, right? But then after about, say, 10 minutes or so, your wrist starts getting a little bit wobbly, or your fingers start, you know, loosening up a little bit, and then your angle just goes all to, it goes somewhere it shouldn't be, right? And then you have to set it down and come back a couple of days later. Now this one, you can see there that I am not, I mean, I've got our edge bevels gone, but I haven't pushed the shoulder of this up. So what that means is that I'm sitting up too high. So we'll add some more oil and I'll drop my angle down. There we go. Now you can see that hollow portion is just about gone. But the only problem is that I spent too much time at a higher angle here, so I need to lay this back a little bit more. You can also see when you pull the knife off the stone, you can look at the slurry pattern on there. Now see, I got some slurry coming down and ruining it all up. But from here, where the blade bevels are, that's actually been removed and the slurry is building up on the flats. So that kind of lets you know that you're in the right spot also. You can also do a magic marker. I got one over here. Magic markers really help you figure out where it is that you're grinding. Okay, so I've got that whole blade bevel marked up and half of the flats. So now I come over here and I take one stroke and you can already see where it's worn off that blue. Now let's hope that, I see the towel took away quite a bit of the marker on the flats, but you can still see a hint of it up in there. So I still need to get a little bit lower. There, now see, all that marker is gone. Okay, so we have got, and I tell you, we've got a very light burr on here. So we're going to go ahead and finish sharpening this edge. Just because while we're here, we might as well, right? Now these crystalline stones, since they're so, they're kind of like a Japanese water stone, in that they're pretty soft for what they are. So what happens is all that slurry that you saw on the blade, that's actually, you know, stone particles being pulled off of the stone. And the reason that is a good thing is because this stone is built up of, you know, a whole bunch of these silicon carbide shards, right? And they're all glued together, okay? Now, if they didn't come off, like an India stone is kind of the same deal, only it's an aluminum oxide stone. If they didn't come off, then the tops of those abrasive particles will get worn down. As they get worn down, they won't come off of the stone, and so the grit kind of acts a little bit finer as you use it. This stuff won't. As you sharpen, those pieces of abrasive will dull a little bit, right? If you're not putting enough pressure to release new abrasive grit, then the second that it quits cutting, your hand will automatically be like, well, hey, it's not cutting anymore, let's push harder. When you push harder, it'll strip that top layer of grit, worn grit off, showing you some fresh grit underneath, and it'll go back to cutting like it should. So now we go to the fine side. The coarse side there, I think, is, I want to say it's like 120 or 180 grit, somewhere around there. The fine grit, I think, is like a 320 or a 400. So now what we need to do before we sharpen the knife is we've got those big, deep gouges, you know, from the coarse grit. So what we need to do is go ahead and do the same thing on the fine stone, as if we were trying to thin it out some more. And what that'll do is it'll just polish out those deep scratches. And it shouldn't take very long. Okay, that's it on that side. And that's a bit on that side. Now you can really tell here that there are that there's a shiny spot here, or a ribbon of shiny spot here, and a shiny spot here, and there's that dull section in between. That's the remainder of that hollow grind. Okay, but now we've got it thinned out, and we've got it pretty much to an edge. So now all we got to do is finish sharpening it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put, you can sharpen it at that, you know, at the full blade grind if you want to. That's how the Mora knives are sharpened, or the Scandi knives are sharpened. I typically like to have regular old edge bevels. So what we'll do is we'll just raise that up just a little bit, just enough to where the blade clears the stone. and we'll use a whole lot less pressure. I don't know what that was, maybe 10 strokes or so. And now we got a burr on most of it. We still need a little bit on the point. Now, what angle to hold this at? You know, I say hold it as low as you can. So pretty much, as long as you can get it to clear the finish, and maybe even get a couple of light scratches on the finish, then that's perfect. Then you go use the knife on your normal daily tasks or whatever it is that you want to use that knife for. And if you start getting edge damage, then the next time you sharpen it at a little bit higher angle. Okay, so now we move the burr over the other side. So now we just need to refine that burr. And so we're going to do less and less pressure. Okay, so now we got that burr and it's pretty well prepped. Okay, but it's still there, all right? Now, my favorite way to finish an edge off is with micro bevels, okay? In fact, let's bring you up just a slight, there. So you got, you know, the side's your edge, right? And that burr is gonna be kind of hanging off up here, about like this, right? Now the burr, you can think about the burr as being since this is like a 320 grit stone, you can think of that burr as being a 325 grit burr, okay? A 325 grit burr is going to be much, much finer than a 180 grit burr, you know, from the coarse side. A 6,000 grit burr, like on one of those Japanese water stones, is going to be, you know, a lot finer than a 320 grit burr, all right? If you have something like, if you're using the Murray Carter method, you know, where you're using the King 1/6 stone, and you get the burr all prepped and everything, you can actually tear that burr off of the edge by pulling the edge through a piece of soft wood or a piece of cork or a piece of rubber or something like that. A 6,000 grit burr will basically just flake off, okay? Because most steels can't really support a 6,000 grit burr. And so if it's properly prepped and everything, it basically just falls off by itself. You could also strop that 6,000 grit burr on the inside of your belt or your jeans or something like that, and that'll remove most of it, all right? But this stone right here is a 320 grit stone, okay? A 320 grit burr is way too tough to pull it off by stropping on your jeans or, you know, pulling it through a piece of soft wood or cork or anything like that, okay? So the easiest way to remove the burr on a 320 grit stone, which is a really good working edge, is to shear it off with the stone itself. So pretty much what you do is you have that burr, okay, and it's, you know, bent over to one side if you can see it or if you can feel it. So what you're trying to do when you're prepping the burr is you're trying to get it to stand up just about as straight as you possibly can get it, right? Then what you do is you take your stone, and if your sharpening angle, if this was your sharpening angle, you're going to want to raise the spine up another 15 to 20 degrees higher, and then just with the weight of the blade, shear that burr off. Okay, what that'll do is it'll create a micro bevel on the very, very tippy edge. It'll shear that burr off, and not, the trick is to use just enough pressure and just enough strokes to shear that burr off without creating a new one, all right? Now, the trick to creating a burr, because you're going to go edge leading, okay, which means that you're going to be cutting into that burr, and that's how it gets sheared off. But the trick to doing that is to have a very, very clean stone, okay? So we are going to clean this stone off. And we're going to flood the surface with oil. And of course that paper towel got, let's use this piece of t-shirt instead. Because that piece of paper towel is leaving, you know, bits and pieces of itself all over the face of your stone. There, that's a whole lot better. Now let's flood it. Now this oil is going to help to kind of lift off any stone particles or steel particles or whatever's on the face of that stone and kind of float them away. So once the surface of that stone feels good to your fingertips, all right, as in there's nothing loose and rolling around that you can feel with your fingertips, then it's about ready to take that burr off. Or finish prepping the burr. I think we still needed a couple of strokes to finish prepping it. Okay, so we're just going to do one stroke on each side. Really nice and light. Okay, now I can just feel a hint of a burr on this side. Okay, it is a much more lighter burr. You know, because the first burr we had, you could feel it real easy. Now we've kind of prepared that burr, lightened it up. It's much smaller and it's ready to be removed. Okay, so now we just raise our spine up another 15 or 20 degrees over our sharpening angle, and just with the weight of the blade, we're going to shear that burr. Now I can feel that burr. It's less, it's considerably less, but I can feel it on the other side. So now we do the same thing on the other side. Now here's the art form of this, okay? Each stone is going to cut each steel type a little bit differently, okay? Softer steels are going to get cut easier, but the burrs are going to want to hang on a little bit more. More aggressive stones are going to take off the steel an awful lot quicker than slightly worn stones, all right? So pretty much it's kind of a balancing act. Typically, like on a diamond stone, I'll do 2 strokes or one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, and that'll be it, unless I have a stubborn one. Okay, so I don't feel the burr at all from here to here, but I do feel it a little bit on the point. Okay, there we go. So now we can test out, see if I've got any hair on my arm anymore. I don't know if you guys can see all that hair on that edge there. So now, if you look at the blade, now granted this is a little bit uneven. You know, I'm talking to you guys at the same time I'm working on the stone. But honestly, there's no really reason that, no, actually it's a whole lot more even than what I thought it was going to be. It looks really nice. But now that edge is probably half again thinner than what it, you know, the steel right behind the edge is half again thinner than what it was before we started. So now this knife is going to cut a whole lot better because there's less material right behind the edge that's being forced through each cut. Now, to make this knife cut even better, you could go ahead and you could lay the steel back or lay your angle back even more and take this line right here and move it farther and farther and farther back, okay? Turning it more into a full flat grind instead of a saber grind. That would make it cut an awful lot better. It would compromise, you know, I mean, it would not be quite as strong, but But typically, if you're this deep into knife sharpening, where you're regrinding blades, typically if you get to that point, you kind of know, you know, that if you get a nice thin blade, not to, you know, pry open paint cans or stuck doors or windows or anything like that with it, you're going to use the knife pretty much the way it needs to be used with the edge that you just put on it. Now, you know, I think we're going to leave this video the way it is. There's kind of another technique in between, like a full regrind, like what we just did on this blade. It's called laying the edge back, and it happens an awful lot faster, so I'll probably just shoot another video on it. Maybe tomorrow, because I think I got to get started cooking dinner. But anyway, that is how you regrind. So with stones. Now, if you got a belt grinder, it's the same thing, only you're using power equipment to do it. If you've got a really, really thick blade, like, you know, something that, you know, it's going to take you a long, long time, or if it's made out of harder steel, you know, you can do pretty much whatever you want. I mean, if you got an angle grinder and that's all you got, well, then you use an angle grinder to clean, you know, hog off the material and then clean it up on the stones. These Norton crystalline coarse fine stones, you can do a lot of regrinding work with one of these. I mean, you guys saw that. I mean, how quick that came up. Now, granted, this is a little bitty paring knife at a fairly soft high carbon steel, but this crystalline will cut, I mean, it'll cut pretty much everything I've worked with so far. Now, I haven't got into the super steels, but the only thing harder than silicon carbide is diamonds. So, I mean, I would guess that if a diamond would cut it, silicon carbide probably would also. But the trick is to this whole thing is using nice coarse stones. Silicon carbide, the crystalline coarse fines, the Kings or the Nortons, the 220 grit man-made water stones. Pretty much a repairing type stone, not a finishing type stone. So anyway, so I hope this helps, you know, anybody out that's looking to regrind their pocket knives or thin them out, make them cut a little bit better. You can do this on pocket knives, kitchen knives, hunting knives. I mean, pretty much anything that's made out of steel, really. But yeah, so again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time.